Hello, hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And on today's episode, we are going to look ahead to, frankly, a really strong lineup of fights set for next week's UFC Fight Night in Copenhagen, Denmark. Main eventing, Jack Hermansson versus Jared Cannonier. If that doesn't get you super excited, you're in luck, because this is the first card in what feels like a century that is not entirely reliant on the main event for, fan interest. Because underneath that, we've got Gunnar Nelson versus Gilbert Burns. Tell me that's not a battle of grapplers you've wanted to see for a long time. We've got two important light heavyweight fights, Ion Cutelaba versus Khalil Roundtree, and Michael Oleksiejczuk, one of our surprisingly okay picks from our recent okayification of the light heavyweight division discussion. He's taking on Ovince St. Preux, a classic test if you are in fact going to be an okay light heavyweight, or if you are in fact Nikita Krylov, a meaningless win that does not herald any kind of improvement whatsoever. And then on the prelims, we've got an interesting fight between Lando Venata and Mark Diakiese, and there's lots more besides, right, Phil? Like, as you were saying, pretty much almost every single fight on this card has at least strong enough interest in one of the fighters, or is a well enough matched fight that it's worth watching.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, there is pretty much not a single fight which isn't worth your time in one way or another. Like, Jack Shaw is a big prospect coming up out of the Welsh MMA scene that people are very... I saw one of his fights live in Cage Warriors. He's people are pretty excited about him. He's sort of a bit like a Nathaniel Wood, if perhaps not quite as good as Nathaniel Wood, but we will see. You've got Lando Venata and Mark Diakiese, crazy action fighters. Macy Jason, Brandon Davis is always good fun. The increasingly frequent fights of Siar Bahadazada.
Mm-hmm. Good to see him on a regular schedule, you're right.
Yeah, at least Alessio Chirico. I mean, this is probably one of the weaker fights on the card, but
it's the prelims, though. You know what I mean? Like, this feels like the kind of UFC cards I became accustomed to over the first several years of my fandom. You know, like, you expect a couple weak spots, but we've got cards lately that are almost entirely weak spots. With just a couple things keeping them afloat. And this is refreshing. I think this is a really strong lineup.
Yep, there's a ton of interesting fights, and there's a ton of interesting fighters with futures here. You know, Ismail Naudiev, Mark Diakiese, Macy Jason, it's a chance to look at developing fighters which may have extremely high ceilings, as well as, seeing some fairly relevant upper tier matchups. Even for, some of them might be for weaker divisions, like light heavyweight, but, they're still, like we said, relevant and interesting, and they just should be good fights. I mean, it's a startlingly good card.
Yes, startlingly good. And as we were saying before, last thing we'll say about the quality of the card overall, we will get into the matchups. Arguably a significantly better card than the pay-per-view set for next week, which is, as I was hinting at before, without Robert Whittaker versus Israel Adesanya, which, don't get me wrong, fucking incredible, it's not much of a card, to be honest. There's a couple other names on there, and even those are not the level of matchup in terms of competitiveness that I think we're seeing here. So why don't we just dive in? What we're going to do on today's episode, more prelude before we actually dive in, we're going to run through our previewing of this upcoming fights, and there's a lot of them that are worth at least a little bit of discussion, so we're going to try and hit as many as we can that have piqued our interest, and then we're going to, at the end of the episode, look back at what happened last weekend, or, as in the case of the main event, what didn't happen. But there was some stuff worth talking about, specifically the co-main event that we were very excited about. Carla Esparza, Alexa Grasso, was a firefight. It played out. It totally lived up to the hype that I built up in my head, and we will talk about that at the end of the show. So, without any further ado, for real this time, Jack Hermansson, Jared Cannonier, maybe not one of the harder matchups on this card to predict.
I think, that all depends on Jared Cannonier, really, doesn't it? Because he is one of the most shocking fighters that we've seen in recent memory, because he is someone who has gone from light heavyweight to middleweight.
Used to be a heavyweight.
And has looked better.
Yes. Somehow. I think when your problem is very specifically having no takedown defense, it only makes sense to move down. You know?
Yeah.
It's worked out really well.
Yeah, that's true. Because he's always had insane physical durability.
Yep.
With the one exception of that Dominic Reyes knockout, which was strange. But, you know, I'll always remember him just, like, laughing off Iwan Kutalaba's shots.
Yeah, he got knocked out by Sean Jordan in his UFC debut when he was a heavyweight. But, you know.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Other than shots where he's put into, like, extreme duress and just doesn't see them coming, like, Jared Cannonier takes hard blows with serious composure. There's no doubt that he has a good chin.
Yep, and he has really good cardio, even when he was getting, like, out wrestled by Glover Teixeira. It wasn't like the fight didn't really significantly go downhill. He just lost the whole thing. Mm-hmm. He never went into a point where he was just completely exhausted and crushed. So, yeah, I mean, his physical traits, I guess, have actually translated pretty well to middleweight, particularly given the people that he's been fighting. Primarily, you know, David Branch, who he was able to exhaust and then knock out because David Branch is quite fragile. And Anderson Silva, which was incredibly sad.
So, that being said, incredible as the success at middleweight may be, given how rarely that does seem to happen, the matchups don't really tell us a whole lot about, like, where any of Cannonier's specific skills may have improved. It's difficult for me to say, for example, how much his wrestling may have improved, given the David Branch matchup. He was taken down pretty quickly into the first round of that fight. I guess one thing you can definitely say positively, he tried to get up. He tried very insistently to get up, and that was a problem against the bigger men he was fighting earlier in his career. Was that he didn't have the strategic awareness of why his ground game was failing him. In fact, like, he ran into a problem I think we see from lots of fighters, where his defense on the ground, his defensive guard work is really strong. Does a really good job of keeping an opponent's posture controlled or destabilizing them as they're trying to strike. Occasionally will work for a submission. But it was really strong, and he would defend really capably on the ground and then lose the fight. So the best thing you could say about the David Branch fight, I think, is that he was taken down, quickly worked to get some underhooks, and stood up. Some of it did seem to have something to do with his physicality, that he was just strong enough to power out of bad positions. But physicality is a part of it, you know? There's no doubt really in my mind that he is, in the terms we usually think of, explosiveness, speed, balance, agility, that he's a better athlete than Jack Hermanson. Yeah,
and probably than most of the people in this division.
Yeah, arguably.
But yeah, the question is, Jack Hermanson has proven to be like, okay, he has proven, and this is slightly worrying, to be someone who just can be gotten to with sheer, pure, like, burst damage. Specifically that Thiago Santos matchup, who is now flying his trade at light heavyweight. But I am curious, but I do feel like the matchup probably does still favor Hermanson. I think he is definitely going to have to be wary of Cannonier's leg kick, but I think we've seen more and more from Hermanson that he's willing to sit at ranges which will make that challenging. If he's just willing to sit on his jab and not concede space to Cannonier. I'm also curious from, like, that perspective, if Cannonier jumps to his feet after if he gets taken down against Hermanson, can Hermansson just do what Hermansson did in his own fight with David Branch? Because Hermansson is getting really confident with his like weird guillotine and choke setups.
Yeah, absolutely.
He went from one in. I'd even forgotten this. He went for one in the fucking first round against Jacare.
He almost got it. He almost got him with that like Schultz style deep arm in guillotine.
Yeah, so I suspect that if Cannonier goes in there with like a get back to my feet at all costs mentality, there is a solid chance that Hermansson just taps him out.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, there's a difference between scrambling back to your feet fighting David Branch than there is someone like Hermansson. You know, Branch wanted the back in their matchup, and you know, again, I don't want to undersell Cannonier. I mean, I think it's pretty clear he has worked on his wrestling. You know, he at least had some responses trained in. Branch shoots a bad shot, and he's able to he's get ready with the underhooks. And then he's pivoting. You know, he's taking the momentum of the shot away very quickly, killing it right there before it even gets started. And when he was, you know, wall walking back to his feet after getting taken down by Branch earlier on, he kept his elbows in nice and tight. He spun around. He went for his underhook. It was all sensible, good stuff. But absolutely, that Hermansson is an opportunistic submission fighter. He is looking for those quick openings to jump on, and I don't think he really has any reason to be worried about potentially giving up top position against Cannonier. Maybe Cannonier has a killer top game that we just haven't seen yet, but you know, Hermansson has shown to be a very, very capable scrambler in some of his recent fights, and just supremely confident on the ground. So, the other thing, though, is, like, I just think Hermansson sets his takedowns up a lot better than David Branch does. Like, Branch is really just kind of a fairly tentative jab, and then he's running at your hips. And I don't think his takedown game is really his strongest skill set. Maybe it's not Jack Hermansson's strongest skill set either, but I think we have seen some really quality wrestling from him in his last 3 or 4 fights. So I feel like you gotta go Hermansson for the pick.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that we might not have seen a devastating top game from Cannonier. We have definitely seen one from Jack Hermansson.
Yeah, that's the other thing to keep in mind. Like, however good your defensive guard may be, even Glover Teixeira is a lot more patient and cautious of position and energy expenditure. He has to be, you know? So when he takes you down, you're going to deal with some hard blows, but if you can hold on to him and wrap him up, Hermansson's a different beast. He has dealt with some pretty decent defensive guards, and yeah, ground and pound is savage.
And Teixeira is just, he's pretty one note as well when it comes to it. He is basically just gonna kind of crush you from the top and then try and arm triangle you. Whereas Hermansson has all those like weird positions that he sets up. He's much more likely to, you know, set up wrestling rides on you, or to try and go to his back mount where he just starts punching you under the elbows. Mm-hmm. I mean, under the armpits, where he seems, you know, freakishly capable of finishing people from these situations in ways which other people are not. Mm-hmm. Like, he has an innovative top game, mm-hmm. not just a dangerous one, but one which a lot of people just clearly are not ready for. Even like big, even you know, decorated grapplers like Jacare, he is clearly he's got something a little different.
Is it fair to call the kind of ground and pound game that Hermansson plays like cutting edge? You know, it's something we see from a lot more fighters these days. If I can think, like Kayla Harrison does this stuff with her ground game. Obviously, Khabib, Mirsad Bektic, Gregor Gillespie, Alex Volkanovski. They all have a couple of similar moves and mechanisms they try to work with. You know, when they get someone trapped against the cage, they want to entangle one of their legs. A lot of them prefer to get that sort of behind-the-back grapevine grip on the far arm. Hermansson does a lot of that stuff really, really well. And it's all about, like, maintaining control over a limb or like a pivot point while being able to give yourself posture. So you can just keep the person underneath you straining against a single point of very strong mechanical control while you actually have the freedom to sit up and beat the hell out of them.
Yeah, and I feel like Hermansson is very specifically like he's an innovator for tall man ground and pound.
Mm-hmm.
Like his innovations are, and some of them are shared by other people, but he does. I've compared him to being, he is the ultimate evolution of Neil Magny, but I think they kind of share that in that they've both got a really good, both of them can sometimes look a little awkward on the feet, but they've both got a tremendous idea of how to stack people and line up actually genuinely damaging, accurate ground shots using, from ranges where a lot of from ranges and angles where that shorter fighters literally wouldn't be able to get to.
Absolutely. How are you going to extend your guard to get Hermansson away from you when he can still reach your face? I guess on Cannonier's side, I'm hedging my bets here. I'm just thinking of what other risks Cannonier poses. But I need to see a matchup from him in which I'm thinking Hermansson may not deal with pressure all that well. But I need to see Cannonier pressure, I think, with more volume to think that he's capable of beating Hermansson with that. There's the fear with Thiago Santos, but I think that was, and I guess, hey, Cannonier showed a lot of really powerful kicks against Anderson Silva. So maybe that's a serious factor. If he can walk Hermansson down and hit him with lots of kicks, but then he's got to worry about the reactive shots, and I still have not seen him maintain much of a pace while doing that. We've seen some fights in which Cannonier is notably doing nothing while just walking after his opponent. And the Branch knockout was a counter after stuffing a shot. So I don't know. I just feel like Hermansson is the pick here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick Hermansson as well, but I am slightly concerned just because we've seen a lot of big, tall fighters get undone by someone who just backs them up and kicks the leg, and then you try and step forward to exchange with them, and they just wail away with punching combinations. We can talk about this later when we get to Mark Diakiese.
Yes,
but it's a good strategy against tall people, and it's also what Paul Felder used against James Vick. And it does seem to fit reasonably well with what we've seen as Cannonier's modus operandi lately, which is just to go out there, be fairly cautious, and then just look for kick opportunities. I think
Anderson Silva's not trying to catch your leg and convert that to a takedown. It's just a different it's a different proposition.
Yep, and I think Hermansson just has too many ways to seal rounds, whether it's through a finish or through protracted top control. I mean, as I said, I have been fairly shocked by Cannonier's sheer physicality at this weight class. But passing Jacare, even the test of Jacare, even a clearly somewhat faded Jacare in a very, scrappy fight, it showed me that A, that Jacare wasn't shot, and B, that Hermansson could have a tough back and forth war where it really looked like it was going to go against him at one point and pull back into it and still, dominate the end of the fight.
Yeah, I'm still not.
He can go up against, big, powerful, strong guys and be in trouble and pull away.
I'm still not convinced that his two notable losses aren't just really strong evidence that he's allergic to southpaws.
Yep.
More than anything else. Southpaw kickers seem to be the thing that gives him real problems. All right, well...
I mean, Santos fought a lot of that fight in Orthodox, but yeah.
I guess you're right. Okay, well, yeah, I'm slightly nervous as well for Hermansson. Cannonier, if there's one thing we like to do on this show, Phil, it's just valiantly refuse to acknowledge how important athletic ability really is. and to correctly factor that into our predictions. So once again, I'll probably be wrong just picking against the guy who's really strong and fast and hits really hard. But it just feels like way too many holes in Cannonier's game for Hermanson to exploit. And he has shown yet a real well-rounded knack for sealing rounds. So we'll see. It's an exciting matchup, but there's lots more on this card. When we come back from this break, we're going to get into Gunnar Nelson versus Gilbert Burns. We're going to get into at least one of these light heavyweight matchups. If we have to pick one, we'll probably start off with Oleksiejczuk versus OSP, since both of us are fans of Oleksiejczuk. And Nicholas Dalby is making his return in the most unfair, cruelest way imaginable. And Lando Venata and Mark Jacasey are having a fight. We're going to try and hit all of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're moving on through the UFC Copenhagen card, Hermanson versus Cannonier. Next up, a welterweight battle, Gunnar Nelson, Gilbert Burns. What's it going to be, Phil? SBG or Team Evil? Which of these fighters?
Ooh, that's a tough call.
Right?
It must be particularly tough for you.
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously, I'm picking against Gunnar Nelson. Let's move on. Iwan Kudalaba versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. Great matchup. No, yeah, it's an interesting fight. I find it kind of hard to figure out just who Gilbert Burns is, but I did learn one thing from his last fight with Alexei Kunchenko. One thing I wanted to learn pertinent to this fight was how does he deal with someone who is notably very fast? Because Gilbert Burns is, I think, quite a good athlete, but he has never blown me away with his striking speed. I think he's always been kind of mechanical. He really powers up on his techniques and sits down on everything he does. So even if he's got more speed than it appears, it doesn't really translate. Alexei Kunchenko, pretty quick, certainly very quick hands. And Gilbert Burns' solution to that opponent seemed to be to just attack a lot. You know, just throw really aggressive kicks and then run after the guy with punches and just don't let him get off. He solved it with aggression. And, you know, frankly, that is a thing that Burns has struggled with in the past, is just sort of mustering the composure to stay aggressive when that's the thing that makes sense to do. That's why we see fights like Cub Swanson versus the Korean Superboy, where it's like, sometimes it takes a career worth of experience before you get to the point where you can recognize that someone just needs to be backed up and battled for every inch and muster the courage to do that consistently. So it was not a bad look from Gilbert Burns. It was not a fight that I fully expected him to win. I can't recall who I picked, but it says some things here, I think, pertaining to Gunnar Nelson. The other question is like, you know, like how good is Gunnar Nelson's takedown defense? Or, well, let me ask a different way. Do you think we're gonna see grappling in this fight?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah?
Well, with one caveat, I think.
Uh-huh.
I think we'll see grappling if Burns wins.
If Burns wins.
Because I think, I mean, for me, I think the dynamics of the fight seem relatively straightforward, which is either because they're similar to the ones that they kind of always are with Gunnar Nelson against kind of big, strong, physical fighters who can grapple, is that he's going to either melt Burns in the first round, or he's just going to get outpointed.
Who has melted
And by
Burns?
outpointed, I mean beaten up.
Well, yes, that's the wonderful thing about having a great chin is you can have your fucking ass beaten and pass it off as having been outpointed.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty likely, right? That's the one major thing I took away from that Kunchenko fight is that, like, I would trust Burns in this fight to put some volume on Nelson. He's never been a super high volume fighter. But his most high volume fight in recent memory was the one against Olivier Albin Mercier, which maybe is the best direct parallel to this matchup. Obviously, it's not perfect, but Nelson offers more of a speed threat on the feet. He's got that crazy quick blitz forward. He's got phenomenal timing on those single shots, but that's the thing is that they are always single shots, and he's so very, very hittable when he commits to one of those shots, and then doesn't have any options defensively other than to just back off and try to stay far away. So we're likely looking at, if he doesn't finish Burns early, a really low volume approach from Gunnar Nelson, which is sort of what happened in the OAM fight. I think that's more than enough reason to think that Burns is going to have the volume edge as the fight carries on.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those ones where I don't begrudge people for picking either way on this one, because Burns is not a good defensive fighter.
What?
And Nelson is very good at finishing people.
Mm-hmm.
If he just comes out there and if Nelson just comes out there and just 1-2s him and just deads him instantly, I won't be that surprised.
No.
But I do think that the other check mark that that Kunchenko fight gave us was that it showed us that Burns is still a pretty physically powerful welterweight.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's actually that it showed us that it looks like it's a decent choice for him to be at this weight class, because he's still powerful. He can now, we're seeing that he can now fight at more of a pace, and he can probably take a shot better. So I think it does reduce Nelson's chances a bit of just wrecking him instantly. But there is a lot to be said for the fact that Nelson he's just really, really, really good at starting fast.
Yeah. I don't know. The fact that Gilbert Burns' own defense is so bad is really the thing that's making this difficult for me. Like, he's just going to cover up with both hands on either side of his face. He's going to eat a straight right down the middle, really early on into this fight. And it entirely seems to hinge on how well he survives that. I wish I had a better grasp on how the specific elements of these guys' ground games might interact with each other. But again, I'm not really... I think you're right in that Gilbert Burns always tries to take people down. You know, like most of his wins... I think, in fact, like I was looking at his stats earlier, and his last 3 are very, very similar. There's like a similar range of strikes, and then he has completed 3 takedowns, 1 per round in each of those fights. So that's interesting, but I'm not entirely sure we're gonna see a lot of grappling in this matchup, honestly. And if it happens, like, I hate to admit, I don't think I have a good enough handle on how the specific tactics these guys use on the ground match up with each other. I don't feel like I've seen enough of Gilbert Burns against other grapplers to even have a great idea of how his grappling game translates to MMA. Like, a lot of times it's just a lot of not getting a ton done and then an opportunistic attack. Gunnar Nelson, at least, I think has a much better, much more consistent process for how he deals with people on the ground. But I think I'll take Gilbert Burns, but it's really just because I hate Gunnar Nelson.
Yeah, I think I'll take Gunnar Nelson just because it'll be funny if he wins.
Yeah. Should I stop hating Gunnar Nelson soon? Because it was really just a joke, and he does seem like a really sweet guy. You know, it's the one I feel bad about the most.
Yeah, that's the thing. I also like. It also like I always feel disappointed with myself when someone keeps like defying my analysis I'm just like, God damn you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if someone keeps winning in like, annoying ways, it doesn't matter how great they are as a person. But, yeah, I mean, the thing is, he didn't deserve to. But Nelson also managed to pick up a card against Leon Edwards.
Well, he definitely didn't deserve to.
He didn't deserve to, but at least it shows that he can actually, like, he won the third round. I think that was the only round that he won on my card, right?
Maybe? How did that play out, the third round?
He got like mount on him.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, Edwards had to go into survival mode a bit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's at least partially due to Edwards trying to be too defensive and slick for his own good.
Yeah.
But he just got dropped by a right hand. He was so concerned with protecting his lead that he just let Edwards set up entries on him over and over and over Nelson set up entries on him over and over until Nelson hit one. But it showed that, like, Nelson can still, he can still fight deep into fights and still pick up decent offense and so on. He's not, his inability to, like, the fact that he's less effective in later rounds is more a function of him having a really limited, like, approach, pared down approach, than it is him getting tired or anything like that. So, I mean, there's a real chance, like I said, I think there's a real chance that Nelson just gets his legs kicked to shit. And we just see it's the Rick Story fight again.
Yeah. That just seems like the most likely way for it to play out to me, because, like, it's just the volume of Gunnar Nelson. Like, I think you're very correct to point out the lack of variety in his setups for his shots and also for his strikes. There's just only a couple things he really wants to do. Of course, until it gets to the floor. But Burns is, like, not one of the guys I would expect Nelson to suddenly pick up an incredible amount of momentum on the ground late in the fight. Burns has certainly never looked bad defensively on the ground. And then otherwise, like, if you just keep the pace on Gunnar Nelson and outdo him with volume and stay aggressive, those are the fights he loses. If it's Rick Story, if it's Ponzinibbio, generally, if it's the Alex Oliveira fight, until Oliveira makes the terrible decision to pit his grappling against Nelson's, like, that's pretty clearly what happens. He just doesn't keep up enough output to deal with a consistent aggressive attack, and from an opponent who probably isn't going to be all that worried about the shot and the potential of the takedown. Yeah, I think Gilbert Burns is just the right pick for me. Well, I think we maybe should skip one of these light heavyweight fights, much as I'm loath to skip the potentially okay division. Let's pass over Iwan Cutelaba, Khalil Roundtree, although I'll say kind of an interesting matchup because Khalil Roundtree showed huge technical improvements, huge improvements in terms of composure in his last fight, but he was fighting Eric Anders, who, while he has a very loyal cadre of Twitter followers, is a really, really low output fighter. And Iwan Cutelaba, often to his own undoing, does not know how to turn his volume down. So I think it'll be an interesting chance to see how well Roundtree's improvements actually hold up under duress. So good fight, I think. Very good fight for both guys. But let's talk about Michael Oleksiejczuk and Ovince St. Preux. Why do we like Michael Oleksiejczuk? I feel like we keep mentioning him on the show, but haven't really got a chance to break down what he does.
Because he looks like a decent fighter from another division.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. He looks like an okay middleweight.
Okay. That was easy. He fights... Okay, so he's got a reasonably well-rounded game. He fights at a nice pace, and the stuff that he does makes sense within the context of the people that he's fighting.
Yeah.
That is shockingly rare in a division where the basic dynamic is, we're two giant weird guys. Can you survive my weirdness? I'm going to try and survive yours. And then at the end of it, you're just left scratching your head thinking, okay, I guess that guy won.
Mm-hmm.
But Michael Oleksiejczuk, he looks like he's decided that he's going to be a relatively high-volume boxer, and he does crazy stuff like attacking the body.
Really, really novel ideas in this light heavyweight division. There's something I want to say about Oleksiejczuk, and maybe this is a terrible indictment of the UFC's light heavyweight division. Maybe it's just a sign of growth. And we have to remember, this guy's 24. So he is going to be, I think, relatively quickly improving. Though certainly not as much as someone like, I don't know, recent opponent John Vellante, someone with far more athletic ability, should be quickly improving. His early career before the UFC was largely marked by him, like, suffering terrible attrition early, surviving, and then outlasting his opponent.
He's actually picked up like a ton of in-cage experience.
Yes.
It seems, just because he used to boxcar Homer his way through fights so much.
Yes. And I'm not totally convinced that that's, like, gone as an aspect of his style. He has fought some notably low-volume strikers so far in the UFC. There was a fight with Khalil Roundtree. There was John Vellante, whom he knocked out with a body shot in the first round. And there was Gajimard Antigulov. These are not guys who are going to bring like a volume striking approach. They gave Oleksiejczuk a lot more breathing room than he was getting in some of his earlier fights. I don't think that's entirely because of the changes he's made to his approach. So that being said, is that relevant against OSP? Because it's not like OSP is going to bring a volume striking approach and force Oleksiejczuk to deal with a hailstorm of punches early. But I am concerned that, like, keeping even a slower paced fight at a long range with someone like OSP, someone who is more likely to bring that extreme athletic disparity to bear, this is a potentially much harder matchup for Oleksiejczuk. I think it's a pretty considerable step up, actually, even if OSP's been, having yet another rough run lately.
This is the thing, is that OSP doesn't really seem to have strategic solutions to anyone he fights.
No.
Like, he has his weird, janky game, but he doesn't really seem to apply it in any way apart from the most obvious one, which is that he's like, if you are poor at defending takedowns, I will try and take you down. Yeah. Other than that is pretty much as far as it goes.
Yep.
He's just like, I'm going to strike wrestlers and wrestle strikers. And then that's pretty much all that he does. Other than that, he just kind of hangs at range and looks to shift stance and land a big cross.
Mm-hmm. Or a big left kick.
Yeah. And he's been looking increasingly sort of shot lately. That fight against Krylov was one in which it mostly just sort of looked like the first fight for the first round, and then he just got super tired, and that was it.
Yeah. Hasn't that happened at periods throughout his career, though? Like, at what point is it sensible to say that he's actually fallen off? It's kind of impossible to tell at light heavyweight, I think. Like, his fight with Volkan Oezdemir in 2017, and the same shit happened. He got really tired and then let the fight get away from him because of that. But, that didn't happen in the Corey Anderson fight, which is a higher-paced opponent. Granted, he, wasn't winning, but he managed to have some really good moments throughout and then knocked Corey Anderson out in the third. So I don't know what to make of OSP's progression or regression as a fighter. I'm really not sure.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing we know, it's that he is a very finish-dependent fighter. He really doesn't win very many decisions.
Yeah.
He really is just kill-or-die weirdness. So, like, given that we like Oleksiejczuk and that he makes sense, it it does seem kind of fated that he's gonna get Von Prude.
Right. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure how good his takedown defense is, Oleksiejczuk. He successfully wangled his way out of a one shot against Antigulov before knocking him out, if I recall correctly. But I will say that even with that, the potential for the takedown threat, Oleksiejczuk's fight with Khalil Roundtree is maybe a pretty good parallel for someone who hits really hard and is really fast and then gets tired. Mm-hmm. And the solution in that fight was lots and lots of boxing pressure. We're talking aggressive jabs. We're talking feinting, hitting the body, and then coming back upstairs with the hook. We're talking I think a maybe less powerful, less quick, but more sophisticated version of what Jimmy Manuwa did to OSP. And I'm not sure that anyone else has really done that. Well, Dominic Reyes did. Like, he had the reach advantage, but I don't think OSP just deals with pressure boxing all that well. The man does not have a technical system of strike defense, like, wired in any way. It's entirely get out of range. And if you can successfully put his back to the cage, then you can play all those boxer games with his totally improvised defense. You can go body head, you can feint high and low, you can attack from multiple different directions, coming up from underneath, over the top, in from either side. There's lots and lots of games you can play with someone. Like, this is just a rule of MMA, is that most MMA fighters suck ass with their backs to the cage because they don't have pocket striking defense. So, huge athletic disparity, but having seen Oleksiejczuk do that, it's really hard to pick OSP against him.
Yeah, OSP is definitely in that bottom tier of people with bad defense against the cage. He really is, Yeah. He's in the river dance tier.
Yeah.
Where they just stand up tall and try and kind of walk away sideways down the cage whilst presumably getting knocked out.
Yeah.
I don't really trust OSP to be able to finish people quickly, and Oleksiejczuk is really, really tough.
Yeah, at the very least, his rough early career proved that. The man can take a hell of a beating. So, Oleksiejczuk, and I am excited to see him progress through this division. What else do we want to hit before we take another break? Well, there's the main card opener, Phil. I don't know how to feel about this, because I love Nicholas Dalby. He's a really great guy, as far as I can tell. He's a really exciting fighter, and he's in that special category of fighters that you and I love. Where it feels unfair to use the term journeyman sometimes, but the man does a lot with not a lot of athletic gifts. It's just a very functional style that he's built for himself, and he's just insanely gritty and tough. I mean, shit, if you haven't seen any other Nicholas Dalby fights, and the man has been in some incredible, tough, gritty fights lately, like, you saw his fight with Darren Till. How can you not want to see this guy survive and press back against vastly more physically impressive fighters? That being said, Alex Oliveira is like the cruelest matchup you could possibly give to Nicholas Dalby for his return to the UFC after his last run, was partially responsible for like a spiral into alcoholism, which he just barely clawed his way out of, and then came back and found triumph again in Cage Warriors, and now he's back in the UFC, and he's just fighting the guy who is athleticism incarnate. So, I'm kind of sad about this matchup, even though I'm happy to have Nicholas Dalby back in the UFC.
You know what the weird thing is, looking at his Nicholas Dalby's UFC career, though?
Mm-hmm.
He beat or did well against the athletes and lost to the technicians.
That is interesting.
Because, weird, look at it. It's so bizarre that he beat ZDS.
Although questionable.
Drew with Till.
Very close fight before Zaleski had any semblance of a wrestling game, so.
Yeah. Drew with Till. And admittedly, there are some question marks there due to the, Till's shoulder coming out, but still, he still 10-8'd him.
Mm-hmm.
And then lost to Cummings, Sabota, and Carlo Pedisoli in Cage Warriors.
Yeah, well, Pedisoli's strong athlete. That's kind of his whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is interesting. That Sabata is like a notably unathletic old man who has just developed a really strong, well-rounded game. And Zach Cummings is... I don't know if it's... he's big. He hits pretty hard. He's got good timing on counters.
Yeah, especially just a welterweight. He's big, and he's good at picking people off with hooks.
Yeah. And has no ability to take the fight to someone who doesn't bring it to him.
No, he has no actual range weapons.
But Nicholas Dalby always brings the fight. That is interesting. It does make you wonder, like, how much of Dalby's the rough end to his UFC run was just a product of his drug problems.
I think it was also style matchups that these guys all have, like Sabota, Cummings, to a lesser extent Pedisoli, like they have. I mean, they have much better defensive games than the two people he was fighting before. Like Till, he has a counterpunch or two, but he's not a defensively skilled fighter, and neither is ZDS. Is that Dalby is really one of the things that makes him a good functional fighter is that he is someone who tries to dictate the whole time. And if you are a counter fighter, and you are a faster or like more skilled counter fighter, that kind of just opens him up a lot. But if you're someone who just waits to burst in and waits for moments of explosion, you're going to have a hell of a time against Nicholas Dalby. Which means that Oliveira, it might theoretically be a sneaky tough match for Oliveira, because assuming that Oliveira doesn't just kill him, which is a very, very strong possibility. But Dalby is he's relentless. I mean, if you look at his record, it says, his last fight, no contest, surface deemed unsafe. Because there was an absolute lake of blood.
Yeah, it wasn't raining. It was too covered in blood to continue fighting on. You're right. Like, Dalby's persistence, that's what makes him a good fighter. He's... I will say, like, he's got a technically a very functional game. It works really well. He throws combinations almost every time he throws. He almost always leads with his jab. You could perhaps accuse him of being a little predictable, a little mechanical, but not all of us can be insane athletes who make it up as we go along. So he uses his jab well. I think his recent performances have been marked even more by his desire to just stay in his opponent's face. I think he's become a little more defined of a pressure fighter, which is good for him because his volume and output, his tirelessness, like we used to compare him to Michael Bisping a lot when he first got to the UFC. That was what made him difficult to deal with. And now he's sort of incorporated a style or developed a style that forces you to deal with that volume whether you want to or not. And also, like he's one of these European kickboxers who has a surprisingly competent wrestling game. He can time a nice shot, but also in clinches and scrambles, maybe partially due to his build, he just keeps a good base and rarely ends up on his back in those scrambles. So, but the thing is I don't know. There's a weird story there with the athleticism, the athletic parity in his UFC matchups, but also like it's very much a style problem. Like if the more athletic guys he'd fought had been more like Oliveira, like a little more oriented around weird counters and crazy forward rushes of offense and muscly clinch takedowns, maybe we would have seen Dalby's physicality fail. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the main thing is that Oliveira is not a... This is the sort of crux of the problem. Oliveira is not a technical wrestler, but he's a very powerful one and a very willing scrambler. And he's turned grappling offense from multiple people into terrible, terrible situations just by hulking them on the ground. And the people who have beaten him have mostly been like serious power punchers
Yep.
who have kept a pace on him. And Dalby is none of those things. I mean, if Gunnar Nelson is getting takedowns on Oliveira and then getting reversed and getting fucked up, like, Dalby is going to be getting fucked up much worse.
If Tim Means were way shorter and a significantly better wrestler, not massively, but better, could he have beaten Alex Oliveira? Probably could have. Like, the volume of Dalby is still a factor.
I mean, I feel like he could have beaten Oliveira if he just struck with him.
Well,
I always thought that was weird.
Yes.
But
do I trust Dalby to not charge into the clinch? You know, with that in-your-face pocket volume style he's continued to develop. It usually involves colliding with the opponent and tying up.
Yeah, I think he's just going to get hulked and fucked up, unfortunately.
I'm seeing what you hinted at before. I think the volume, the quick technical, speedy handwork of Dalby, the pressure, like, there's just so many technical gaps in what Oliveira does that, yeah, there's an avenue to do a little bit of, I mean, who has had success doing that against Cowboy Oliveira?
I mean, a few people have really tried, but it definitely is the fact that just people have gotten into gritty fights and have never backed down have been ones who have ended up, taking him out.
Yeah.
Especially recently.
That's Nicholas Dalby, so.
Yeah, so I mean, if he survives, like, if he survives, like, a round and a half, and he's not so badly hurt that, like, that Cowboy is just smirking and feeling good about what he's done. Like, if Dalby's just still relentlessly coming at him, there's a significant chance that Oliveira just kind of folds again.
All right, well, I already picked against athleticism once on this card. I think I'm going to pick for it this time.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to do it. I think I'm going to pick Cowboy Oliveira. I just don't see those tie-ups going all that well for Dalby. I really hope he wins, though. Okay, that's the main card. There's one more fight in here we wanted to talk about, which isn't to say it's the only other interesting one, but Lando Venata versus Mark Jacasey is a weird matchup. We are going to dip our toes into that when we come back, and then we will, at least for a few minutes, talk about the most interesting stuff that happened last weekend after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. All right, folks, we are back. Segment 3, and one more upcoming fight to preview. We'll try to make it pretty quick, but Lando Venata, Mark Jacasey, kind of a weird fight, Phil. The saga of Lando Venata continues. And I just want to say up top, a Kimura win over Marcos Mariano doesn't mean shit. Maybe it's good for Lando's psyche. That's the best you can say about it, is he got a win under his belt for what feels like the first time in ages. Literally the first time since 2016. But who is Lando Venata right now?
It does seem like he's gone from being a crazy, weird action fighter to being a guy with a few physical gifts, which seem to be less pronounced than they were when we first met him.
It feels much more like he gets drawn into brawls that he doesn't want to have lately, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The fights are largely still brawls, but his intent always seems at the start of the fight to do something much different. It's like he's just like looking through the window as Dustin Poirier is making all these technical improvements and having all this success, and he's just like, I'm trying. And it just doesn't work every time he gets suckered back in. Why is that?
I think he's just trying to be more technical, but that has meant that he's now changed his insane slips and taking his eyes off his opponents and his weird spinning stuff, and then now he just kind of walks up to people bolt upright and then tries to jump at them and punch them in the face. He's not a particularly big lightweight, but he's someone who punches fairly short. Yep. Like, he doesn't really have much of a step-in jab or anything like this. He tends to really just come behind big, huge leaping hooks. And that's kind of dangerous. And the fact that he's not very defensively sound... He used to be defensively sound in a vacuum and could also, like, throw some nice slipping hooks that either worked or didn't. Mm-hmm. But now it just seems like he's just kind of there to exchange.
We were talking about this, like, there was defense that he flashed. People still talk about it in his debut against Tony Ferguson. That he had a couple stretches of really impressive head movement. And, there's like two kinds of head movement, broadly speaking. There's the kind where you have your eyes on the opponent the entire time and you are, quote unquote, making decisions, but you're making reads on the fly, and that goes through the sort of network of responses you've wired into yourself, and you're making those calls reactively. And then there's more road head movement where, I know when I throw my right hand, I'm in the position to roll back under so I can get back to my right side. I know when I slip to the left, I can slip to the right, or I can pull my head back, and like just slotting those moves together after certain attacks. And they certainly both have their place. Like, a lot of MMA fighters would benefit from just moving your head arbitrarily after you throw. Like, genuinely just have a default defense after each punch. That would make a massive improvement to a lot of fighters' striking games. But Venata has most definitely regressed. You would like to see, as I think I made the comparison earlier of Kelvin Gastelum, where he has also been a fighter who's shown flashes of some really slick head movement throughout his UFC career, but it was never like integrated into his larger game. And while he was still, getting beamed with every straight shot that came his way when he fought Israel Adesanya, especially as he got tired and the fight carried on, head movement was a big part of his aggression in that fight. And coming in with head movement and slipping and countering, it was, as we said, I think after that fight, it was kind of the thing we were wanting to see out of Gastelum for so long, was him not just rely on his physicality. Lando Venata has not done that. He showed those flashes earlier in his career, and now we don't even see the flashes anymore. And I think you're right. Like, the big problem for Lando Venata is that no matter what game he's trying to play, no matter what kind of pace he is trying to maintain, he does not have the distance tools necessary to maintain distance. And his weirdness, that was once like a really effective aspect of his game, is just sort of the bizarre, idiosyncratic way that he moves. Like, without those distance tools, without him being able to threaten you on the way in or throw off your timing, it ends up just being like a really readable rhythm. It's the thing that always stands out to me when I see Lando Venata fight these days, is like, he just does this sort of bounding bounce into range, and he's not going to jab his way in, and he's got to set up in front of you before he can start throwing, because he throws everything planted and super hard. So, like, people just crack him so hard as he's stepping into range every single time.
Yep. So the question becomes, how does he do against the reinvigorated Mark Giacchese, who I was genuinely worried might have been like broken by his losses to Hooker and Hackburst.
Understandably.
Who then looked really good against Joe Duffy. He maintained distance and realized, like, as we sort of alluded to earlier with potential like Cannonier versus Hermansson game plan. It's like, you know what a really good way of leveraging athleticism is? Mm-hmm. You just burst in and out of range, and when the other guy braces to punch you, you kick his leg, and then if you get into punching exchanges, you just scare him off, and then you get back to kicking his leg.
Yep, you don't have to set him up really. Although granted, he did set him up he had a variety of setups against Joe Duffy. It wasn't quite that Khalil Roundtree, Jared Cannonier territory.
No, and it is worth mentioning that Jacasey is, or was, I think he might have actually moved back, but he was training at American Top Team. And Venata was training at Jackson Wink, and one of these places is now a much better place to learn technique than the other. So the question becomes, can Venata close Jacasey down?
Right.
And I'm without taking damage and without getting... I mean, both of these guys are very, very tough, but I do find myself thinking, like... And Venata is a very underrated... I think his kick got a lot of play when we first saw him enter the UFC, but he is really, like, an underrated, very powerful puncher.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw Jacasey stand up to Hackbrass for 3 rounds, and... I'm just not sure if I trust this new sort of slightly confidence-lacking version of Venata to be able to actually force exchanges over and over if Jacasey just, throws 2 punches in exchanges, backs out, kicks him in the leg, throws 2 punches in exchanges, backs out. Like, considering who they've been, that Drakkar Close ground out both of them, right?
Yes, I think so. He did beat Jacasey as well.
I feel that's a much more like that's a style that Jacasey is actually more physically capable of replicating than Venata is. Yeah,
I mean, here's an interesting question. Like, who is Lando Venata fought lately who has just tried to kind of mitigate the pace and stay at range? I guess David Tamor is the best example of that. Someone who, like, pointedly did not want to get into a brawl with him. And that was surely maybe his most one-sided loss in that entire run, where he was just completely figured out. Jacasey has shown the ability to do that. That's what's most interesting to me, is that obviously in the Joe Duffy fight, like, he had a very clear idea of what range he wanted. He wanted to stop Duffy from pressuring him, so he used his footwork and the occasional counterpunch to do that. But really, he just wanted to smash his legs at long range, and he maintained a pace where, like, that was a very viable strategy. But even in the losing effort against Nasrat Haqparast, we saw some serious improvement. Defensively, counter punches. We saw Jacasey taking the steam off of his shots to use them a little more as defensive weapons. And Haqparast was just, like, way too fast. Way too good at closing the distance for any of that to matter. But we definitely saw improved defense and composure in that fight from Jacasey. If he can do that to Lando Venata, especially if, as it seemed in the Venata's fight with Marcus Mariano, again, like, not a meaningful win, then, like, does this new Lando Venata have any way to stay on him without just walking into a kick or walking into a punch every time? Because I'm kind of thinking no.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. His path to victory seems, it seems like Haqparast, but he's just far less.
Haqparast
has far less of a predilection for that style.
Haqparast is just way more dynamic. Like Venata, he wants to, as we've said, he wants to walk into range, then plant his feet, and then throw his combination. There's just, like, too many points at which that breaks down, where his opponent can get away or counter him. Haqparast is like, he's bursting into range with flurries of shots. He's way, way more difficult to deal with, and he covers distance really well. Venata doesn't. And without that, like, I have to go Jacasey.
Yep, same here.
All right. Well, that's it for UFC Copenhagen coming up. As we said, like, a really, really strong lineup on that card. So definitely one to look forward to. I had somewhat high hopes for last weekend. Not sure that it entirely panned out the way I would have wanted. the main event, Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stevens, lasted for 15 seconds. And Yair Rodriguez called Jeremy Stevens in the eye, and that was it. And then everyone was really mad and very emotional and very upset. And is there literally anything else to say about this other than just that brief summary? I think that's it, right?
People who think Jeremy Stevens would somehow voluntarily quit are incredibly stupid.
Yeah, have you seen a Jeremy Stevens fight?
Yeah. That's pretty much it. Other than that, there's a whole bunch of boring takes on this to be had, and they're all pretty much just, basically it just comes down to shit happens.
Uh-huh. All right, well,
sometimes it's good to try and deal with that with grace.
Yes.
But other than that, it's just unfortunate, and hopefully we can see this fight again.
Yeah, it's definitely one I'd like to see rematched. And really no less so having seen the co-main event, because like sort of the premise of last week's episode was, hey, there are two really intriguing style matchups at the top of this card. I had similar feelings towards Stevens Rodriguez as I did towards the co-main, and the co-main panned out perfectly. It was exactly the wonderful, multifaceted, competitive, well-matched fight that I think we expected. You want to kick us off on Esparza versus Grasso?
Yeah, I mean, this fight was amazing.
Really good.
Sort of an exact encapsulation of how you can get a great fight due to not only the strengths but also the weaknesses of the fights involved.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen Carla Esparza is someone who can occasionally get shocked into her defense, just completely vanishing.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely saw that in terms of, you know, there's certain points where Grasso would hurt her badly and you would just see Esparza just look utterly horrified.
Arms go flailing, knees lock out, just sort of stumbles back. Yeah, horrified is a good way to put it.
Yeah. And this sort of allowed Grasso to rack up huge moments of offense on her.
Mm-hmm.
Esparza is, conversely, Grasso, we've mentioned that she hasn't looked like an amazing takedown defender, and that really was true here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was impressed that Esparza set up her first shot so patiently. I think she fought a very, very smart first round.
She drew out a few exchanges, landed a couple left hooks in those exchanges before she even went for the reactive shot.
Yeah, because if there's one thing that's gotten Esparza into trouble, it's been spamming her takedowns
Mm-hmm.
so that they become predictable. But she actually, you know, she really waited until she was sure this time. And, you know, Grasso's inability to stop the takedown basically made this a much more fun fight than it would have been otherwise, because we got to watch some great grappling exchanges and we got to watch like a genuine, one of those rare things, which is like a genuine back and forth between two quite stylistically divergent fighters.
Mm-hmm. Back and forth, man. That was the nature of this fight. Just endless momentum swings. We may have a couple things. Why don't we very quickly get the scoring discussion out of the way? Are both you and I in agreement that Alexa Grasso did win this fight? Because it seemed pretty clear to me that she won this fight, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I would probably give it maybe like a 29-27.
Potentially, at the very least.
I might give her a 10-8 in that last round. She hurt Esparza badly at the beginning and at the end and almost submitted her in the middle.
Mm-hmm. And really like didn't suffer. She also got the better of the grappling exchange before the submission from her back. Because Esparza was getting tired and was way more interested in controlling than she had been in the second round, which is the one that she pretty clearly won. And like Grasso was just nailing her with elbows and constantly attacking from her back. Esparza got nothing done even when she was in control in round 3. So at the very least, rounds 1 and 3 were pretty clearly Grasso's for me. But again, I don't want that to take anything away from the quality of this matchup and why it played out the way it did. Esparza did do a good job of setting up those early shots. I think we did see something that's characteristic for her, is that as the fight goes on, especially as she's taken damage on the feet, she goes into that Wilson Hayes territory that we talked about last week, where, when she loses confidence in one area of her game, the whole kind of starts to slip. So she certainly was spamming the takedowns a lot more in the later portion of the fight. A lot more ugly shots from long range. But early on, she looked extremely sharp on the feet and with the grappling. The connection between the two was really strong. We didn't see the body shots from Alexa Grasso. Very, very few of them. There was like one uppercut to the body in an exchange, but like, maybe I'm a broken record at this point, but like, if you're fighting a grappler, like, do a jab to the body. It really works really well. You can keep them far away, and they can't possibly change levels through it. So, like, I think that alone may have made this a significantly different fight from Grasso's perspective.
Yeah, I think in some ways she was fighting just from... Yeah, she was headhunting golden exchanges. Sorry. I mean, she was fighting from far away. She couldn't hit, traditional body shots, but there was no reason to think that she couldn't really hit a jab to the body, aside from the fact that they were both fighting from pretty lowered stances, so the head was much closer. But it would have been nice to see.
You can just jab the chest. That's a very good tactic. Just jab lower than the head so that if they do dip down, they're going to run into it. You know, that's all. I would have liked to see more of that. But lessons we learned about Alexa Grasso, like the improvements that she brought into the Kovalevich fight were largely still there. The problems we've seen from her in the past was like being put off her game by being defensively minded. She wants to, something works against her. It's a reactive shot or it's a counterpunch, and she wants to, in her head, I think she wants to solve that problem. She wants to come up with a way of addressing it and working around it so that it's no longer a problem. And, sometimes that doesn't work in fights. That's a very young veteran mentality. But like, if, for example, she had let her volume totally wane here because of the success that Esparza was having with her shots early, she would not have stuffed as many shots as she did in the third round. She would not have, she would not have got such a good case to have actually won this fight. I know she didn't, but she definitely still looked like the upgraded version of Alexa Grasso to me. And frankly, I think like getting a sort of bad decision against her might not be the worst thing in the world. Like on the one hand, I think Alexa Grasso, maybe this is me reading into the cutesy smiling too much, but like she seems to cope with defeat pretty well. Seems to just kind of slide right off her back when it happens. Certainly she's had some tough losses in the UFC already and shown improvements from one fight to the next. But taking a loss to Carla Esparza, in which you can kind of feel like you deserved the win, but also have clear examples of what things you need to work on, I don't think that's a bad thing for Alexa Grasso going forward. And she's still only 26 years old. So, I don't know. I found this to be a fairly heartening experience as someone who was hyped about Grasso before she came to the UFC and then saw her kind of get, sidetracked and run into some early roadblocks that she's still progressing and doing it at a very good, reasonable clip.
It was gritty. I think, as we mentioned, like the scoring in last week's card, the Gaethje, or the week before card, the Gaethje Cerrone one, was generally kind of excellent in prioritizing damage over control, and this card seemed to have a couple of examples of going the other way. But she was composed. She fought. She picked up on her opponent's weaknesses as the fight went on, and she showed that she can be put in bad situations and she can fight back out again. I mean, the only things to really criticize are they're either technical or that if you felt like she was down on the cards, maybe you would have wanted her to go after the finish more in the last round.
Yeah, and even there, that critique came from the commentators, but given the difficulties she was having with the takedowns, I get it. She was just trying to stay measured and pick her shots correctly, and it's not like she still didn't put a terrible beating on Esparza in that round. So, if she comes back at having just worked on a couple of those specific wrestling positions, be a little more aggressive when you've angled out and you're just about to limp leg, but you're not really pushing down the other person's head hard enough. You're not really springing back to your feet quickly enough. Like, she had a lot of the right ideas. It's just a matter of executing them, with vigor. Okay. Well, you kind of alluded to it. Do we want to say a couple words very quickly about Brandon Moreno, Askar Askarov, or do we just want to wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, this was another great fight, and it shows that Brandon Moreno is guaranteed dynamite fun if you put him up against grapplers.
Yeah.
He is still a kind of terrible striker.
Yeah.
But he is so fun when he's scrambling, and he is so hard to keep down, and I sort of want to put him against Jussier Formiga, but also recognize that there's a really good chance that Jussier Formiga might just actually box him up on the feet.
Yeah, that would be interesting, actually. There's also the fact that Jussier Formiga is not the most flyweight of grapplers, if you catch my drift. And that, like, Brandon Moreno is such a scrambler that he handles the typical flyweight grappling style really, really well. Formiga's a lot more, he's going to freeze you with him.
Formiga is built to prey on the flyweight grappling style.
Exactly. Yeah, in the same way that Demetrius Johnson often was, where like once he locks you down and you're used to the scramble never ending in every other fight, you really freak out. You're like, this isn't supposed to happen. We don't weigh enough for this kind of control to happen. So yeah.
So that's why they need to have that fight, and then Moreno needs to beckon Formiga into his guard. I don't want to see the boxing exchanges. I know who wins that.
Yeah. That's basically all to say about that matchup. But I think it's Askar Askarov, good pickup for the flyweight division. Very exciting, very scrambly. Really, really persistent, Khabib-esque in some ways, kind of grappler. Makhachev-esque maybe is better. But I basically like the takeaway from this fight is it updated our perspective on Brandon Moreno, which is his striking is just as bad as it's ever been. In fact, in some ways, it's worse than it has been at points in the past. But if you put him in there against someone who's going to allow him to scramble, you're probably going to beat them. And then the judges are going to not give the decision to him. All right. Well, there's a lot of fights to cover. I think we covered most of them. Phil, before we wrap up.
There's one we haven't covered.
Oh, no.
Betch Correia.
Oh, yes. Fuck. I forgot. Oh, damn. We don't have time to talk about it. Damn it. Why didn't I make space for that? What a fool I am. Fuck.
You're a goddamn moron.
Betch Correia rules. She's still picking up wins in 2019 in the UFC. Holy shit, she's 36 years old now. She's not getting any more athletic, I'll tell you that much. And damn it, she's a hero. She's so great. Yeah, fuck. I wish
watching her like trot around, pouring away at people, like then pouring away at the body, like a smart person would.
Yep.
In the body of someone who is not meant to ever fight.
Yep.
And yeah, strategically minded Betch Correia.
She is the smartest, meanest motherfucker in your cardio kickboxing class. Absolutely. I love Betch Correia. I really do. I have so much respect for what she does, and it's like every fight is so hard. And every once in a while, she just perseveres. And even when she doesn't get it done, she's always making the right decisions and fighting the best she possibly can with the best strategy she can manage. So respect to Betch Correia. She did it again. Some people don't like Betch Correia, and those people should not listen to this show. I do not want your audience, all right? Get away from me. If you can't respect what Betch Correia does, away with you.
I mean, she was still debatably winning against Marion Renault, Holly Holm, and Irene Aldana before they all blew her out the water, which is a terrible indictment of the striking talent of
Absolutely.
This division.
It is. But also the heart of Betch Correia, like it's such an inspiring tragedy to watch her fight Irene Aldana and just be clearly pulling away with the fight, and then it just flies out of her hands at the end. Same with the Renault fight. The Holly Holm one, I don't remember really if she was winning that one, but
it was competitive.
It's always
I think there's few realities in which she actually wins a 5-round fight with Holly Holm,
but she comes a lot closer than she ever should.
Yes, that is for damn sure.
Yeah. Betchkohea, the god, the goddess. All right, Phil, before we close out, anything coming out this week?
Just the preview. So it's going to be Hermansen Cannonier.
Yeah, well, that's for me. Like, I'm not going to promise anything because, like, I haven't done shit the last couple of weeks. I've been busy doing other things and haven't produced an article. So I'm going to try, but no promises, folks. No promises whatsoever. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. If you want to get at us on social media, Twitter is usually the best place to do that. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush with a B-U-S-C-H. And find our articles when we do publish them, although Phil's previews with David Castillo are very, very consistent. So especially find those on bloodyelbow.com. And support our Patreon, tell your friends, yada, yada, yada. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.